Well, thank you very much for staying with us. In case you're joining us right now, you're just in time for the conversation on matters taxation here in the country. And I'm not alone. But before I introduce my panelists, two of my panelists, we all know that yesterday we had the CS for Treasury, John Mbadi, saying that, Kenyans earning 30,000 or less should not be taxed. And the pay as you earn for those earning 50,000 should be reduced to 25%. Now, it's supposed to, take an tax amendment bill 2026 before the House so that it can be debated and passed. I mean, what does that mean for the common man? Why are we taking this amendment bill now, yet in a few months we'll be having the finance bill 2026? Those are just some of the things that we are going to discuss. Of course, in regards to as well, matters of taxation is the issue of companies closing down here in the country, the tax regime here in the country. We'll be delving so much into that in this particular conversation. Be sure to join us until the very end. Now, joining me, like I said earlier on, to my immediate right is Sheila Olang, who is a development economist. As she, tells us something brief. Sheila, I don't know what you have to say in regards to the CBK directive on money bouquets.
I think somebody somewhere, especially Luo men, I suspect they were behind this because Valentine's is coming. So, wanajaribu kuweka mchezo za town. Let's CBK give the directive post-Valentine. We're waiting for the bouquets.
The CBK is not headed by Luo man.
Well, very much.
They've been compromised. Akina Ramogi here behind those nonsense.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for making time. Also joining us is Odhiambo Ramogi, who is an economic analyst. A very good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you. I am still recovering from the discovery that Ian is a supporter of Manchester United and is talking trash against Arsenal. But I will live with it for the duration of this show.
Thank you very much. We'll talk about that later on, of course, after the interview. Now, to begin this conversation, a quick one. Let me begin with you, Sheila. US dollars been around 128 Kenya shillings has been stable for the past 1 year or so, if I'm not wrong. Now, that should be reflected through the reduction of, the cost of goods and all that. But that is not the situation on the ground. Why is it so?
I think that's an interesting question. It's simple, but it's also a bit complex. So anytime we are looking at the value of the dollar right at home, because the shilling is actually pegged to the dollar, so there's different forces or factors that come in to determine what this value is. On a best case scenario, it is normally, the market decides and the market decides what to do. But there's other types of thinking, the more Keynesian economic type of thinking that says, the state also sometimes has to have a hand in stabilization. So you don't just leave it up to the market. Sometimes the state comes in to try and stabilize. Now, in the case of Kenya, it's not that the state has come out and said, hey, we have a hand in this, quite the contrary. However, there's been critics who are saying that, CBK has a hand in stabilizing the dollar. And if that is the case, the fear is always, well, how sustainable is it if you're not letting the market actually decide the valuation of the dollar? And what presents itself, therefore, is a case such as what we are seeing now, that the dollar has been stable. You have inflation going down, but we are still grappling with affordability issues. We are grappling with inequality. I think there's just a report that came out that was saying a whopping, 22 million Kenyans are now less than $300, maybe $303, or maybe 380 something shillings per day. Although we are steadily, the economy is moving well. I mean, it's growing. We are now at about 5%. And you can see that these are teething problems of economic planning that do not really consider the micro and the macro holistically. So that when you look at the macro indicators, they look really shiny and they look really good. The dollar is stable, we're growing at 5%, inflation is at an all-time low, and the rest of this. But then you find the common mwananchi who is asking, but why am I not feeling this? Because all this sounds like jargon to somebody who just wants to figure out where the next meal is, to somebody who wants to figure out why can I buy uniforms to go to school the next day or my healthcare. And so in a best case scenario, you should have a fiscal policy where, monetary policy where you are trying to, as much as possible, to ensure that you're having organic growth and organic stability of the dollar.
Fair enough. Odhiambo, let me come to you. Let's now talk about the proposal by Treasury CS John Mbadi that Kenyans who are earning 30,000 should not be taxed. The issue of pay as you earn for those earning 50,000 should be brought down to 25%. Now, what do you have to say in regards to that particular proposal? How timely is it? Is it too late?
Thank you. The proposal by the Treasury CS is welcome. A reprieve at any given time is better than no reprieve at all. You know what they say, if someone has you by the neck under their arm, that's when you realize even a reprieve at the final minute is appreciated as opposed to no reprieve at all. But let me just do an overview of my thoughts around that subject. Tax regimes are twofold. There is what we call the progressive tax regimes and the regressive tax regimes. Progressive tax regimes are tax regimes where the people earning less tend to pay less tax or have a lesser tax burden than those who earn more. And regressive is where those who earn more tend to pay less tax than the people who earn less, so that the tax burden at the bottom of the pyramid is higher than the people at the top of the pyramid. Ideally, all tax regimes desire to be progressive. In fact, if you look at the tax bands, the pay as you earn, most countries would say that the people at the earning the lowest should pay less tax compared to the people earning the highest, ideally. In practice, however, most of them are regressive. And they are regressive because rich people have more power, more access to negotiate for better tax reprieve, so that in the end they end up paying less taxes. While the move by the Cabinet Secretary is indeed meant to reinforce our progressive tax regime approach, compared to the rest of the continent, we are still paying a lot of taxes. Now, our peers in terms of economic performance and our aspirations as a country are the likes of South Africa, the likes of Nigeria, the likes of Egypt, the likes of Mauritius and Seychelles. The lowest tax paid by any African on the continent is in Libya. They pay 10%. 10% of their income. Let that sink in. Mauritius, Seychelles, and Sudan all pay 15%. 15% of their income is their tax. That's less than half of what our highest tax is. South Africa, until 2 million shillings, don't pay. It is welcome, but our tax rates at 35% is still high. He's attempting to implement, and I'm finishing now, okay. He's attempting to implement the proposals by ICPAC that were made last December. These proposals said that up to 30,000, no one should pay taxes. But those proposals also said that we need to bring our highest payee to 30%. And so that then everything is squeezed around there up to 30%. So him implementing part of it, so that then now we are only saying up to 30,000 don't pay, and not lowering pay, not lowering VAT, not lowering corporate tax, I think still leaves a lot to be desired. But it is still welcome.
Okay, it is indeed welcome. But I mean, before I come back to Sheila, one would wonder what would be the possible impact of this particular move on the revenue, for example, the country's revenue?
Well, payee really is the highest revenue earner at around 700 billion per annum. So this small adjustment will indeed impact pay. I haven't created the model to know how much by how much, but I know it will impact pay. However, I think the benefit far outweighs the cost to revenue, the opportunity cost. Because what this will do is it will leave more Kenyans with disposable income. And in that process of having disposable income, we expect that there will be savings. Those savings can be invested, and that investment can actually generate new income and more revenue for the government. So yes, it looks like it is going to cost them some money, but at the end of the day, it still is going to add value to the economy.
Fair enough. Sheila, let me come to you, but still in regards to the same matter. One would wonder, questions are being asked in regards to, the timing. Why would we, for example, now have this Tax Amendment Bill 2026 taken before or to the floor of the House when we'll be having the Finance Bill 2026 in just a few months?
I think we are discussing economics, but economics is always political. It's very clear that there'll be political points to be scored. At the end of the day, I think finally it's one of those scenarios where it then becomes a win-win. If they get political points from it and we as Wananchi get relief, why not? Yeah. So I think I would focus rather on the fact that it is here and it is now and it's a good thing. And maybe deep dive a little bit in what that actually means in practical terms. So we have about, I think now it's like 3.7 million Kenyans are salaried, right? So when you talk about pay, who are we actually discussing here? It's 3.7 million. And I've always been a champion of saying, please give the paycheck, give the pay slip a break, because we seem to be attacking it right, left, and center. Since the regime came in, we have introduced the housing levy, which is now at what, 2.75? The housing levy. Right. We have SHA at 1.5. And then, so you have the housing levy, you have SHA. And if you look at your paycheck, your net pay before this administration came in, it was actually higher, while the cost of living is also rising. So I've always said we are attacking 3 million out of a possible 15 to 16 million workforce. So it's a very small percentage that actually ends up having a paycheck. The rest of it is really in the informal sector. So because you've had this small percentage, it's almost unfair that they get to carry the burden of the whole country. They're building houses, they're paying for SHA, and they're doing et cetera, et cetera. So anytime there's a relief, then for me, it's a very welcome move. Now, that being said, remember I said we had 3.7 million that were in this formalized or that have pay slips or paychecks. Now, what percentage is it that is earning under 30,000? Because then it helps us really calculate what the dent in the economy would be. You have about, 1.5 million thereabouts. So it's quite a big number. You're heading towards almost 50% that are earning under 30,000. So if you think about it, then you deep dive a little bit more, because the devil is always in the details, right? Sometimes as a headline, it looks interesting, but now you really look at it. Prior to introduction of SHA and the housing levy, when housing levy was introduced and SHA was introduced, someone who was earning 30,000, let's not discuss the 24,000, because anyway, there's been the 2,400 relief, so there was nothing to pay there. I think the difference will be in this 6,000 that now the 30,000 earners are going to look at. The contribution was about 1,275, right? That was additional to, out of their pockets. Now with the proposed tax relief remember, we were at a negative of about 1,275. Now, with the relief, they'll get an additional 900 added back. So if you look at it in actual terms, it's not really back to where we were prior, but it's a good dent. It's there and it's adding something more. And remember that I always say there's nothing wrong with paying taxes. We were one of the countries, and I'm glad you did the analysis, we are one of the countries that pay the highest taxes in the continent. What matters the most is value for money. You have to get your value for money when you pay the taxes. I think that's now where things start to go a little bit haywire, because the people who are paying taxes are, a small percentage of the workforce, that is 3.7 out of 15 or 16 million. And then on top of it, that money that they have is actually under attack. So if I look at it, we are not really at the pre this administration era. But on top of it, you have the new medical plan, you have SHA, and you have the housing. So you have to consider it that you're not back at, 1,275, you got 900 back, but you also get SHA and you also get housing. So for me, any relief is a good relief, because I'm a proponent of saying purchasing power is where it needs to be at. So this is one step towards increasing that purchasing power.
Fair enough. But again, I mean, how possible is it to implement it now, or will we possibly have to wait until the next financial year?
It has to be taken to Parliament. You know, it needs to be a law, it has to be taken to Parliament. And I think CS Mbadi is very ambitious. I'm curious to see how this works, but he seems to be extremely determined that this works.
Also, certain members of, National Assembly, including also senators, are talking about how, the executive would want to bulldoze certain things because the CS already talks about, this will be implemented.
It's a given.
And, it's in a way, they say it is disregarding the role of the House because they have to debate and deliberate on the matter.
This is one of those cases where I always say we've seen the House come together and pass things extremely efficiently and quickly. So I hope the speed at which they impeached Rigathi Gachagua, for example, that is the same speed that they're going to work with in order to bring relief to Kenya. Like I said, I think this scores them political points. I wouldn't be surprised if they bulldoze their way into this. And for once, it's a win-win for our pockets. And then if they get political points from it, then sure.
Fair enough. Odhiambo, you talked about, Kenya having one of the highest, the pay you earn across the continent. Let's talk about, how high on other issues, because 2 months ago, the World Bank, released a report, and the report noted that Kenya has one of the highest restrictive business environments across the globe. Now, they went ahead to say that, there are more state-owned enterprises here in the country compared to, private entities, and they say it's over 200 state, enterprises, and most of them do not even meet the targets. And they say this kills competition. How crucial is that competition in ensuring that we are stable as a country?
Well, first of all, allow me just to throw a comment on the passing of the tax and the political nature of the tax policy as proposed by Waziri. Yes, it is very political. We are going into the elections, and people want to appear that they are working, that they care for Mwananchi. And so the tax policy is actually to communicate to Mwananchi, we actually care about you after 3 years. So it is very political. But all economics is political. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think the take home would be, I wish we were more strategic in our tax policy, so that ab initio we know that this is our tax policy for the next 5, 7, 10 years. That sense of stability gives investors a sense of confidence and helps us to attract investment. That has not been the case. Our tax policy goes with the political whims and political climate and weather, and I would really find that to be unfortunate.
Now, before you even respond to that, you've reminded me of something, because I don't know whether you are here yet. Talking about taxes and how there's funds are used. We did run a story here. We've seen quite a number of governors splashing millions of money into very unreasonable things. For example, there are governors who spent 3 million in lighting a Christmas tree, another one spent 55 million in buying tree seedlings. I mean, the issue has always been, most Kenyans would probably not have any issue with being taxed, but how that money is being used.
Precisely.
What does it say about the caliber and group of leaders that we have?
Crooks, but to be fair, I think the people who vote them are also crooks, because they demand bribes, and so by the time now Mheshimiwa gets to office, he's looking to recoup the bribes that he gave Mwananchi to get the support. But for me, I think the bigger issue is indeed how we use that tax. Now, if you go to the Scandinavian countries, their tax systems get to 45%, 50%, 55%. But you also don't pay for education. You also don't pay for Medicare. The roads are beautifully done. You don't have to, again, get out into your pocket and pay a security man, a garbage collector. Sort of all that is taken care of. So what remains is essentially your disposable income, pesa ya kukula. Here, we are expected to pay up to 35%, but the education the quality of education is wanting. So you still have to pay hundreds of thousands for your child to go to school properly. You also have to pay a lot of money for your car to be made every now and then because parts of the roads are not. You also have to pay for healthcare for yourself and the people you love. And where you live, you have to pay for garbage collection, security, etc. And so that is even apart from the corruption, the governance issues that you're raising, which is how do these people use money? You know, it's on record, a president saying that a third of our budget goes to corruption. And so that tells you that a third of all that we give, which is, if you calculate a third of 35, that's about 10.5% of your income just goes into other people's pockets. And so it's an unfortunate situation we are in terms of the governance issue, but also the use of the taxes that we give. But I am hopeful that 2027 we will drain the swamp.
Well, it's a matter of time. Wait and see whether...
Back to your question, you had asked a question about competitiveness and ease of doing business in the country vis-a-vis of our involvement of the government in business practices. She had raised the question of Milton Keynes' proposals about how and where government should get involved, what we call the Keynesian economic theory. Milton Keynes suggested that government involvement in business should be limited to regulation, should be limited to investment, and perhaps, you know, taxation and making policy. Government running business, actual running of business has always been counterproductive. Partly because in that process there is no clear owner of the business. So everybody feels entitled, and partly because there is no clear objective. You see, where there's shareholder value, there's a clear objective and clear governance structures. That is always missing in a government establishment. I don't know if you've been seeing conversations around how KQ is losing a lot of money because influential people go to KQ and say that KQ has to take their aircrafts and hire their aircrafts, irrespective of whether KQ has sufficient aircraft or not. That in itself is something worth considering. But essentially, government involvement in business is one thing. We must shift our attention from government doing business to government supporting the private sector to do business. And this must be seen. I saw that the government was keen on irrigation. Galana Kulalu. Government wants to farm. That has always been counterproductive. It's a very communist approach to development and has proven time and again to be non-successful. And for me, I think that would be the one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, in terms of ease of doing business, the structural issues have been significantly resolved because now e-citizen makes work a lot easier, whether it's in terms of compliance, whether it's in terms of registration. Compared to when we were registering in the 2000s, when I graduated from the university, to today. Today it's a lot easier to register a business than it was at that time. The bigger problem, however, is our ability to attract investment. And you cannot attract investment with a high tax regime because the investor has to consider translation costs. Okay. One, you cannot attract investment with corruption, evident and rampant corruption in governance. I think those two have hindered us from attracting significant investment in the region. And finally, there's also the whole question of cost of doing business. Our energy costs are too high, and we don't seem to get it right in terms of telling KPLC we need to lower our energy costs. So if we can put that in order, the ease of doing business as regards attracting investment, tutakuwa tuko sawa.
Fair enough. Of course, high taxation and operational costs are one of the key concerns for different businesses. Now, Sheila, in regards to matters, restrictive business environment, the country's PMR score is at 2.92, which is above the average for which should be 2.27. The average is for middle-income countries, and that also, they say, makes it harder for businesses to enter and compete in the local market. One would wonder, how important is this competition in regards to the prices of commodities, for example, and creation of jobs in the country?
It's extremely critical. I think in the modern economics that we work in today, if I were to be the one planning the economy, the first thing I would do is to ask myself, how can I use the private sector to meet my development goals? So as a government, I'm not going to employ, the 50, 55 million Kenyans that exist. But what I can do is I can make a business-friendly environment that will do three very critical things. The first thing is, when you have ease of business, when it is easy for people to come in and to be able to start businesses and grow, what you do is, number one, you create jobs. We know that we have 75% of this population are under the age of 35, they're youths. And the biggest issue they have is the issue of unemployment. As a government, you cannot employ everybody. You're not supposed to. Your job is very much to set the pace, set the environment, and then you let the private sector come in. So when you have an area where it's easy for you, it's easy for businesses to come and set up in an economy that is growing so much, in a continent whose economy is growing more than any other continent, what happens is the private sector then employs the people that you have. The second thing is, when you have currency going in and out, you're importing, you're exporting, it's very good for a country. Because what does this mean? It means that you don't just have access to employment per se, but you also have an exchange of capacity, right? So you'll have somebody coming in to train, and then they have exchange of training and capacity, and this is very important. So what I would do is, in fact, I would prepare the workforce to be able to meet the economic plan that I have. I would think about economies that were on crossroads, economies like India, that had young populations that they were not sure what to do with them. And they decided, you know what, we're going to be call centers, we're going to be IT hubs. So in fact, they prepare a lot of the students because they knew that they wanted to create this environment of a demand for call centers and ICT centers. When you go to India and you find these big business hubs, it is not by chance. It is through proper economic planning. It was intentional from a planning perspective, right? So because sometimes you have people going and they're studying things today that we know for a fact that they will never be able to be absorbed anywhere. So why don't we give better direction so that we pre-plan that when the workforce is coming in, we already know that in the economy, we plan that a good sector of it, that they would be going into it. This can only be achieved if you give businesses a good environment for them to thrive in. Lastly, we have the biggest issue. Let's not think about FDI and people coming from outside setting up business. Let's think about ourselves as Kenyans. And because we're very well educated, we have a lot of resources within the country, there's a lot that we're able to do. Factors of production must be low if you want to grow any business. It is just a fact. Number one, power. The cost of electricity alone will stop you from doing any kind of business that you're ever interested in doing, right? So you must make factors of production be low enough so that you encourage people to join business. I'm glad that you're mentioning that at least now we are having all the bureaucracy that is involved in terms of compliance of setting up business. It's getting a little better, but it could be better. It absolutely could be better. I personally, I opened up a fish factory, right, down in the village. I'm from Migori County. And I can tell you that it's not easy because you get this license from this person at this point. Then you're told, oh, no, this one, and then that one. So there's no consolidated way of being able to just set up your business. And then after that, compliance itself is not easy. Meanwhile, the factors of production, like I have an ice plant, of electricity are also quite high. It is just a practical example of myself as somebody who is saying I need to be self-employed because I'm not waiting for anyone to go out and then give me a job. So the long and short of the answer, and one more thing I forgot in terms of locally is access to credit. That's a big problem because we are competing with the government to access credit that is available locally. Yeah. Why does this even matter? It matters because if you remember the time when our economy did the best during Kibaki's time, one of the things he did is we were not competing with the government to access the credit. You could have an idea, you could go in, you could get your loan at a reasonable rate, and then with this you're able to set up a small business. It is important that the government becomes an enabler and not the one that is actively involved in this business environment. Because once you do that and you're able to attract businesses, again, the businesses will meet your development needs. They will employ people. These people who are employed will then circulate money within the economy. There will be demand for schools. There will be demand for healthcare because now there'll be people who are working and then they have health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So this is how you grow. But if you have a government that, you know, the taxes are quite high and you're not getting value for money, another example is that I worked in Denmark, right? I worked in Denmark for over 5 years. I was taxed at 47%. Right. 47% out of my paycheck was going into taxes. And guess what? I would have told them, take more if you want. Because I did not have to pay for healthcare. Public transport was safe, it was reliable, it was 24 hours on a train. You know, you had access to education. You didn't have to pay much for that. So I could see, and I I didn't mind. I could tell them, even take half of it if you want, because the rest that you leave me with is really for me to just leave disposable income. It's not for me to worry about if I get cancer today, will I be able to afford healthcare?
Right. Of course, the concern is also in regards to, you know, you're struggling to provide or to get basic services, be it health. I mean, recently we also saw the issue of the social health authority, you know, billions being lost. But you've talked about companies. I mean, Kenyans losing jobs at the end of the day. I want to hear from you on the issue, for example, the issue of cocoa. Which closed down. I mean, thousands of Kenyans will be affected by that. There are at least 700 directly employed people and thousands others who are indirectly employed. There are more than 3,000, you know, shops, for lack of a better term, that, you know, Kenyans would go and, you know, get this fuel from. One of the things that they've talked about is they did not get that, you know, the later that they needed to continue with business. And one would wonder, does that form basis in regards to the business environment that the government has created here in the country? Because if such an entity can close down and the government is willing to just continue, and then it raises concerns about how investors can come into the country, pump in money, create employment, but at the end of the day, when they need certain things to facilitate them to continue, you know, creating these jobs or even create more jobs, and then they hit a snag because they cannot get the documents that they need. How crucial is it for the government to help such companies?
Right. It's extremely crucial. I'm glad you brought up the example of cocoa. I think that was the latest example, not just from an employment perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. We know that a country like Kenya will suffer the most when we have environmental challenges. So here was cocoa that decided to use, you know, the new model of carbon credits, right? And they were able to grow into this formidable entity within the country that had 700 direct employees who in one day they woke up and they didn't have a job. So remember the 22 million? Well, you just added 700 more people, plus additional ones that come from their households who depend on them, that went down into that list. Why? Because they couldn't agree with the government, and you know, it was just a simple letter that they needed from the government, but they couldn't agree on the terms and conditions for them to remain open. I think that's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate because we live in an economy where we also need to be creative in the green space. And cocoa was not just itself an entity that was doing that, but it was also inspiring so many other entrepreneurs to follow the lead of cocoa. And what does this signal to investors outside the country? It goes back to the point that you were saying, that it's not the easiest place for you to be able to run business. The risk that they took in order to come here, and then that is taken away from them. So it's unfortunate that the government of Kenya could not come into agreement. But the one who suffers the most, again, is there's over 4,000, it's almost 5,000 people who just by closing down cocoa will today not know where they're going to get the next meal from, and how their children will go to school, or how to access healthcare. So we must create a business environment that is very progressive, that allows for ingenuity. We are now distributing Nyota funding throughout the country for these young people to be innovative, for some of them to start and create businesses. It would be very sad if we then had used this money, which by the way we need to pay back, and then we curtail them because of tax regimes or business environments that we cannot thrive in. It would be very counterproductive.
Fair enough, because Cocoa joins a list of many companies that have closed shop. But if you look at the statistics, for example, even as I come to you, Odhiambo, by June 2025, there were 2,260 closure applications that had been submitted to the business registration services. Now, that number had grown by 24% compared to the same period in 2024. Now, if you compare the rate of registrations and an application for registration and application for closure, it is far apart. 24% for closure applications and an increase of 1.3% in companies that want to register. Now, she has mentioned or alluded to the issue of Nyota Fund and all. I mean, if you look at the legacy projects of, that the president wants to build in the country, there's infrastructure and all that. I mean, how does this further put pressure on the common man when we start, repaying the funds that we have gotten to undertake this infrastructure?
Well, today I fear that some of my friends I would differ with a lot of my friends, especially on cocoa, including Sheila.
No problem.
Cocoa's is a bit unique. I agree with you that, yes, the closure rate is higher than the opening rate for businesses in Kenya. The business environment in the country is not conducive for anybody, really for any investor. But cocoa's situation is unique. There are three things that I would want to comment on cocoa, and then after that I will leave you to make a conclusion. One is their business model. Two are the market dynamics. And three is the whole regulatory framework around carbon credit. Cocoa's business model is that they come into the country, they sell these stoves at around 10% of the cost, which is around 1,500, and they would probably cost more than that, over 10,000. And they sell the ethanol at 50%. Now, so after that, then they go to the international market and say, we have saved the climate environment there. Yes,
yeah.
By ensuring that these people no longer cook using paraffin, these people no longer cook using charcoal, they are using our stoves, and for that matter, we are willing to sell. Now, this model is a bit difficult in itself because, one, how do we know that after I have bought your stove, I will never use jiko ya makaa to cook my lentils and omena and use the other one for nyama or for something else? And so that measurement is a bit wanting. Two, how do we know that if in fact there is reduction in the use of makaa, it is only cocoa that has made that reduction to happen, and not the policies put in place by the government, and not any other company that is selling clean cooking stoves, and not even just our general development framework that has made us now to use more LPG gas. Okay. That is the business model. So that business model, it is itself wanting. But allow me to go to point number two, and then we can. Point number two is market dynamics. When you come into a market like Kenya and you say that you're going to sell ethanol at 50%, and you're making this market to be very reliant on you and distorted. So that then if I wanted these people to go into LPG gas usage, in other words, you are making that transition to take longer than is necessary. Okay. And possibly even distorting the pricing of the same. The third one is the whole question of the letter of authorization that you are talking about. Now, if the government issues the letter of authorization to cocoa and says, okay, you go sell those carbon credits, what that essentially means is that that credit that has been given to cocoa can never, ever be traded again by someone else. So it's an opportunity cost to the country. And you know, these ones are usually registered to the country. Eh? So if there's any other cook stove that has done that, they cannot touch that credit. If there is any policy we've made towards deforestation or afforestation, it cannot touch on that. And so it's a very, I don't think we are looking at the opportunity cost. And these are foreigners that have come. Allow me to finish, and then we can fight after
because
that.
There's that side, we're running out of time, but there's that side, but also the side of, you know, the impact that the business has on Kenyans.
No, there is no doubt that there is impact. But I wish it was just your regular business model where you come into the market and you sell what you have, and you do not essentially use that environment to try and go into the international market.
Okay.
So and get our carbon credits and then now start selling them. And then in this model, you make sure that there's no Kenyan in your shareholding structure.
So what next for those thousands of Kenyans who've lost their jobs?
For me, I think the best approach would be transfer the ownership of cocoa to someone else who's willing to go into the market and actually roll up their sleeves and do the hard work of reaching that market at market value. And actually, you can retain the staff, you can retain the brains at cocoa that have made this to work. I actually believe that the management can buy out cocoa and make this happen.
Okay, fair enough. Sheila, I don't know whether you have anything to say in regards to that, because...
Yeah, mine is always just simple.
Briefly, yes.
Simply saying, I mean, as we discussed this, we have Kenyans who are affected. So as much as that made sense to me, the gap was what was the alternative? It's easy to say, yeah, that doesn't work, but what works? What works, because we do need green solutions within our economy.
Absolutely.
So it's one thing to say, well, Coco's model isn't working. Very good. So what are we doing to develop the, you know, Ramogi's model that would actually work and would actually be compliant? What I'm not okay with is, you know, having the one that was trying to offer a solution. And in terms, for me, I'm just looking out for the Kenyans who are part of this, the households that were benefiting from this. How do you still offer green alternatives to them instead of just shutting down Coco? What can we learn from them and then have a pipeline that we're creating the next big thing?
They have an awesome business network.
They have an awesome business network. But as you've seen, even countries like China will always develop a parallel of phones, of technology, right? So they don't just sit and wait for Google to come in. Right. When you go to China, remember, you don't even have Facebook. They had another version of Facebook that you have to download. So what are the options here? Because I think we still need the 5,000 Kenyans to be able to have a livelihood.
Am I allowed to answer that?
Yeah.
10 seconds.
Ramogi wants the last word on this.
I think the best approach moving forward is if we can have solar electric stoves that can actually take advantage of our situation in the country right now. We have a lot of solar, too much of it. And if we can use that for energy for cooking, we'll be very progressive. And we can use the distribution channel of cocoa.
Okay, fair enough. We're running out of time. I have two questions, and you'll give me answers to that, even as you give me your parting shots for both of you. Let me start with you, Sheila. There's the question that I asked in regards to all these monies that have been taken to fund these infrastructure projects, also money that has been poured into the Nyota Fund. Does that pile more pressure on Kenyans when it comes to the time that will have to repay this money? And number two, back to the issue of those Kenyans who are earning 30,000 will be tax exempt. The question is, what other practical solution can the government come up with to cushion all Kenyans? Because 30,000 and below is one band. It's a certain group. What happens to the other remaining Kenyans who are faced with high taxes?
I think I'll start by the second question. I think the relief is the exemption of under 30,000 is a good exemption. It's not meant to make anyone rich per se, but even if you're earning 400,000, your first 30,000 will be exempt from taxation. So everybody across the board will be able to benefit from this. So I would welcome the relief. However, I would say that let's keep digging in a little bit more and see how do we, first of all, increase our revenue base? Because also by doing this, remember that we are decreasing the revenue that we're going to be getting as a country. How do we move from having 3 million people holding the burden of revenue from payee into tapping into that total of 15 to 16 million? Formalize the informal sector. That's one way to do it. Find ways. We have cooperatives, we have SACCOs, we have different ways that you can do this in order for us to increase the base. Now, as we increase the base, we don't increase it so that we have a better budget for corruption, as we're alluding to. It's not that the more money we make, the more corrupt we get, right?
Okay.
As we're increasing it, we also have to work on corruption. Our corruption index is still quite high. It's at 31 last time I checked. And that is extremely high. We have to remember that all these nice things we're looking at, we have to pay them back.
Okay.
Let's not, I think discussing debt today, or DS debt, and even debt that we have as a country, we are 12 billion. I think it needs a whole segment. It's not fair to just throw that, throw that in at the last minute. Okay. Because we need to, I think we need to think that when you're smiling and saying you're getting something for free, you, your parents, your grandchildren, they're going to have to pay back this money.
Fair enough. Odhiambo, briefly.
Well, Nyota is a grant, so we are grateful for Nyota. I just don't like the way it's being used to advance a political position, especially by His Excellency the President. But politicizing something that's very beautiful and that should be able to reach every Kenyan. But that notwithstanding, I think the direction of working with multilateral organizations to get the grants to help the young people is in the right direction. My problem, Ian, in all this is there's a very reactionary strategy in government. It's time now to go to Mwananchi. So there's nothing that has been going on, and all of a sudden now we have Nyota. There's nothing that has been going on in the way of making our tax policy, and all of a sudden we are lowering the taxes. It's very reactionary, so that there's no running theme of can we build into this properly and make Kenyan youth more empowered, make Kenya richer, strategically build our economy. That, for me, is a bigger problem, because I ask myself where I sit, what is the economic strategy of our country today?
Okay.
And there is no answer.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We have to end there, but thank you very much, Odhiambo Ramogi, for making time. Thank you very much, Kilolan, for, of course, joining us. Always a pleasure having you around. That was the conversation in regards to matters of taxation here in the country. Thank you very much for making time to be with us. See you again next time. Have yourself a wonderful night, and like always, God bless.